I'm Marsha Acker. I am the CEO of Team Catapult, and I have a book called Build Your Model for Leading Change. And I think happiness to me is a warm cup of coffee, a beautiful sunrise, and the view of some blue water, whatever that might look like.
Podcast is brought to you by Podman. At Podman, we help podcast hosts manage, market, and grow their podcasts. For more info, go to trypodman.com.
Welcome. You're tuned into the Happy AF Show, your weekly ticket to a world brimming with joy, energy, and positive vibes. Are you ready to dive into stories that uplift, strategies that empower, and tips that can transform your day from blah to brilliant? Every week, we bring you the most heartwarming, inspiring tales from people just like you who turned their can'ts into cans and their dreams into plans. Whether you're commuting, working out, or just lounging at home, the Happy AF Show is your go-to source for all things happy. Together, we'll explore the corners of happiness, from the simple pleasures of everyday life to the grand gestures that make life worth living. So buckle up, dear listeners, as we embark on this joyous journey. Get ready to laugh, learn, and maybe even shed a tear or two of joy. This is the Happy AF Show, hosted by Phil Gerbishak, ready to guide you through another incredible episode. Let's get Happy AF now. Let the show begin.
Hey, good morning, Marsha. Congrats on the book. You are awesome. It's so good to see you.
Thanks, Phil. It's great to be here.
Yeah, cool. So happiness is the simple stuff, huh?
It does seem that way, and yet I wonder what makes us quest for it a lot.
That's interesting. Yeah, what does make us quest for that? Why do we struggle so hard to find the simple stuff? What do you got any
Mm.
ideas on that?
I have some. I have some hypotheses. I think that so much of what so part of my job is coaching executives and leaders, and I notice that when we encounter difference or things that are difficult to navigate, a lot of where I focus is in conversations and behavior, and we encounter things at work that are different or people that we feel like are difficult to work with. And there's something about that that eventually seems to sort of suck the joy and the happiness out of
Hmm.
how we work and how we interact with others. And so I think it comes down to how we interact and where can we find, I don't know, empathy, and ways to work with others who are different from us or not quite like us, and do it in a way that we don't lose ourselves in that process.
Empathy. That's a
Mm,
big word. I think a lot of people are missing that. I think the world is missing that right now, that empathy and that nuance of what the heck is going on. I mean, your world is different than my world. My world is
mhm.
different than this person's world, and we're all ultimately different.
Yes.
And so as you lead leaders, I mean, you're building a model for change. I mean, there's a lot of change happening. So
Yeah.
where do we start with change, Marcia?
Mm. I hold a belief that, and actually it's what I write about in the book, and so much of what's in the book comes out of research done by David Cantor. He was a clinical psychologist and took that work into organizations through a theory called structural dynamics. But what sits at the core of how I think we can lead well through change is finding our center of gravity and in three things. The first is, what's my own model for how I lead? What is my leadership? What does my version of leadership look like? What does my behavior look like? What's my model for behavior? And another way you can think about that is, how do I show up? Like, I think about it as, like deep functional self-awareness of who I am and how I show up in the world. And then that informs how I behave and interact with others. So a model for leadership, a model for behavior, and then a third model that defines my model for living. So the primary question underneath of that model is, What does it mean to live a life worth living? And I think it's the intersection. You can think about those three things almost as a Venn diagram of when we're able to be super clear about at least those three primary questions. I think it informs how we lead change. And there is no lack of change in our world. I think we could all agree with that. I don't think it's going to get any less. If anything, I think it's the pace is going to continue. And I find that to be the thing that so many leaders are challenged with is reacting, which is where, I think many of us end up when we don't have a solid foundation in how to respond. So really clear awareness of self, awareness of how we want to show up, and then actually how we are showing up. And then how we balance that with how we're living and how do we not lose ourselves in that process. So I think those three primary questions are a bit of the quest. They don't have
Mm.
easy answers either.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, there's nothing easy about any of those. My model
Mm-mm.
for leadership, my vision for that, and how I show up is tough. And then we include then how do I live? I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talk about today in your
Mm,
book. You've got,
yeah,
do you live to work or do you work to live? And I think so many of us, well, we'd all say, no, I work so that I can have a better life.
yeah.
I don't think that's true. I think that if we look at our calendars, I think that's a lie. We live so that we can work more. Is that what you find in your executive coaching as well?
I do. And I even find it in my own, it's been my work to do as well. So I care a lot about what I do. I'm quite passionate about it. I think, I wouldn't argue that those are, you know, maybe their strengths overused because I get a lot of energy from what I do. But my challenge has always been to not let to set boundaries and stick to the boundaries and to
Mm.
not let work consume or override or bleed into things that bring me joy and happiness, carving out that space. I love to start mornings with a journal, a cup of coffee, and a sunrise. Like, I think there's no better way. But carving out those spaces so that I'm not, running a racket, just overly focused on work.
Yeah. Wow. So, is that? I mean, did that come about
Mm.
because it had to come about? I mean, are you just naturally a morning person, or how did you start that practice? Because that's a great practice. But I'll tell you, my mornings are not often that structured. I'm
Yeah,
getting up. I got to get my kid going. I
yeah,
got to make sure the dogs are out so they don't crap in the
yeah,
house. I mean, like holy crap, here we go. And now, oh my gosh, it's 8:20, and I got to get them out the door.
yeah. I have all of those things too. I have a 15-year-old. And I have certainly who has to be out the door at 6:45 for the bus. I, I would love
Wow.
to have a voice in what time the local high school starts. But I think the balance for me is what I've watched and learned just in my own practices. When I can start my day with a little bit of intention and a little bit of clearing my mind, my day goes so much better. So it means I do get up earlier. I am a morning person. I might not be quite as early of a morning person if I just sort of naturally did it, but I crave even if it's just 20 or 30 minutes of space to have a bit of a slower start. I often say, like, if I oversleep and I'm rolling out of bed, I feel like I'm on the back of my heels all day long, just sort of, trying to get up and catch up. But that's me. I think it's about finding what works for each of us, and what does it look like to carve out space. I just know my day goes better when I start that way. And there are mornings where it doesn't happen. And when that happens, I don't make it an issue. It's not about, berating myself over the fact it didn't happen. I just start again the next day.
Hmm. I think, yeah, the kind of the idea of don't miss twice, right? So
Yeah.
hit it, and then okay, I missed tomorrow, but I got to make sure that I get to that the next day. Do you follow that same practice and ritual on the weekends as well, or do you cut yourself some extra slack, or what happens?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still enjoy it on the weekends. Although on the weekends I tend to have a little bit longer of a period of time before the rest of my house gets up and running. So, yeah, I can start reading a book that I enjoy, or I can do a little bit extra with that time. But it's not like I have to. It's not time driven on the weekends, and I think that's what makes it a little bit more leisurely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, you said a big word earlier that I want to dive
Mm,
into, and that's boundaries,
mm,
especially for leaders, right? My team needs me, my customers, whether they're internal or external, need me.
yeah.
My leader needs me. How do we set those boundaries so that
Mm,
we're not losing who we are?
yeah. I think boundaries is a great way to think about. I'm a big fan of principles and defining principles for yourself. And so that's actually a big part of what I mean when I say defining your model for living and defining your model for leadership. And then also defining your behavioral model, because in each of those, in the work to do that, I will start to find things about, yes, so for example, somebody needs me. It's great to be needed. And if we're really intentional and thoughtful about that, and we've done the work to kind of map out, all right, so what does my leadership look like? Well, ultimately, I think that leadership happens for me, and my model of leadership is to grow other leaders. I don't view leadership as a positional characteristic. I see it as something that we all have access to. And so if that principle, help being really clear about that and being clear that that's in my model for leading. So when someone says, hey, I have a fire and I need you right now, I get to sort of run it through the clarity of, well, how do I want to respond to that? And if I respond in a really quick way that just has me, break a boundary that I've set with myself and cancel personal plans to go hop into something or take over, or allow a phone call or meeting to take over something else I was already doing. Well, now I'm out of resonance or balance with my own principles. And it's not that I won't ever do that, but I want to be intentional about when I do it so that I'm not reacting to everything that comes. I think it's really easy to get lost in and I think this is true for leaders today, just get lost in the reacting and doing. The metaphor I use, so years ago, a very early boss said to me, it was a tough time. It was a small startup. I was director of operations. We were working long hours, and I was complaining to him late one evening, and he said, "You are running down the road telling me you're too busy to get in the car." And I, to this day, love that phrase because I see it. It's the thing I watch in myself when I find myself sort of slipping back into the pattern of getting too busy, and I see it happening to leaders all the time. So when change is all around us, I think it can be really easy to get caught up in I just need to get stuff done. I just need to react. I just need to react. And so then it becomes this process of being too busy running down the road to create any time for balance or boundaries, or even thinking about what my boundaries would be, or what is my model for leadership? I don't know. I don't have time to think about it. So I think that really doing some of that reflective work helps us get in the car rather than keep running down the road.
Yes, kind of slowing down to speed up, if you will,
Yeah.
is really critical. So, what are some of the tactics that you help
Mm,
leaders find to actually do that? Because I mean, if the world is on fire,
yeah.
there's not going to be a world tomorrow if I don't put this sucker out, right?
Yeah. I think, one of the things that we talk about in the book is the difference between low stakes and high stakes, and how when we're behaving from a place of low stakes, I have more range. So low stakes is is sort of when I'm at my best, and I have the ability to think through things, be intentional about things, and respond. When I get triggered, and we all do, and so I think of high stakes as being kind of this internal reaction where our pulse quickens, our hands get sweaty. And when we're allowing others to sort of trigger high stakes for us, either by their emergency or they say something that really just rubs us the wrong way, or we feel like there's pressure from all sides. I think any of those situations, we can find ourselves in high stakes. And by the way, um, I have a hypothesis. I don't have the research yet to back it up, but I have a hypothesis that in our businesses today, in the workplace, I think that many of us spend a majority of our time operating from high stakes and living life at that sort of stakes risen way. It's when we're not at our best. We get short with people. We respond in a curt manner. I often say sometimes leaders that live their lives in high stakes a lot will leave a wake behind them where
Mhm.
it can feel like there's just there's some damage control to do. So I think tactics wise, I often ask leaders to start paying attention to what's the difference between low stakes and high stakes. And when you notice you're in high stakes, what's something that you can do just to first lower the stakes. Because if we continue to act from a place of high stakes, all we do is just ratchet one another up, actually. If I'm in high stakes and I tell you, I need you to get this done, I'm likely going to generate high stakes for you. And then we just start this sort of circular pattern of everybody we interact with. We're raising the stakes. So I often say to leaders, find the thing. So for me, sometimes it's just taking a break and going outside and walking around for 2 or 3 minutes, even something that small. If I can't leave a conversation, if it happens in the middle of a conversation, I ask leaders to think about noticing when the stakes are rising for them and what also might be happening for the other person, because chances are the stakes are rising for them as well. So, can you locate even just a tiny bit of empathy for the other person that they might, so something might be going on for them, they might also be in high stakes. And could you ask maybe one small question about it? Like, what's happening for you right now? Or it sounds like this is super important. Can you tell me more about what makes it important or what makes it an urgency? So something that begins with a bit of curiosity rather than um, a more high stakes response. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Instead
Mm,
of being directive
yeah.
and telling us what to do, you're suggesting that actually we be present and we try to get curious and figure out, so what's behind this as opposed to what's going on. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so lots. Wow, lots of stuff there about being curious. So I
Mm,
think that was a really good question that you asked there. Is so what's going on for you
mm.
that's making this more high stakes? Do you have other questions that we can use to kind of pause that leadership escalation that
Yeah.
might help us, Marsha?
That's my favorite question. I use it whether I'm facilitating, I use it whether I'm in a one-on-one conversation. So anytime I find the stakes rising for me, I will often ask, what's happening. The other, sometimes it can also, if you're in a conversation where you can just name the stakes rising for yourself. So a lot of times, I will
Mhm.
say something like, so I'm noticing the stakes are rising for me as we're having this conversation and I'm wondering, what's happening or what's making this such a critical thing right now, or just to name, like I'm noticing the stakes rising because I'm going to have to get this done later today, and I've got other things that are conflicting. So if I find a way to name what's going on, so that I can sort of put that conversation and data back into the conversation that I'm having with the other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Acknowledging in ourself, often that self reflection allows
yeah,
other people to see it. And I think most importantly, gives them the opportunity to say, oh, yeah, that's happening for me too, as opposed to I have to be vulnerable first. As a leader, if we can go first, we can be
yeah,
a lot more effective in managing that change.
yeah. I think there's a lot of, um, I see it all the time when we're not, so when the stakes rise, I think that is one of the number one ways in which we end up in a stuck conversation, a repeatable pattern, or we just end up irritated with somebody else at work. And it's because we do everything but say that the stakes are rising. So we go, if I watch leaders do this all the time. They're in a conversation, they're getting frustrated about something, or the stakes are rising, and so they make different moves. They try to fix things, or they try to fix it or solve the topic that's on the table, rather than to say, "Hey, like this isn't landing well for me. Can we talk about that for a moment?" And so I think sometimes just that simple change in our conversation changes the whole nature of the outcome of it. Otherwise, somebody else gets irritated, they shut the conversation down, now everybody else is frustrated. So it just becomes this circular kind of collective rising of the stakes.
Yeah.
A big
So
component.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So imagine I'm a new leader though.
Mm,
I don't know really maybe even that the stakes are rising. Can you help me understand how I might feel the stakes rising? Is it the quickening of the pulse? Is it almost like it's going to be a crucial
yeah.
conversation, or what's there?
I think so I often ask leaders, I'm a big fan of journaling. So I ask leaders to go get themselves a journal and just have it sitting on your desk so that you can be in an interaction with someone and do just a tiny bit of reflection afterwards. So indicators that that the stakes are rising for you, you become frustrated by it, or you're angry. Or one of the best ways is if you want to leave that conversation and go complain to someone else about the other person, that's another indicator that the stakes are rising and that you likely held back saying something that really needed to be said in that conversation.
Ooh, wow. Wow. So what do we do about that? Like I don't I mean, can I say, Marsha, you're pissing me off. What's going on here? Right? I mean, what do
Yeah.
I say?
Well, that would be you saying it from a place of high stakes, right?
Okay.
Um, which is the piece about, I think the first step is number one, I say all the time, awareness precedes choice, precedes change. So the first thing I want leaders to do is to develop the awareness muscle. Can you start to notice when the stakes are rising? That's number one. And even if it's in reflection, like it's happened and it's after the event. So I think that's probably the easiest place to start is, do you want to complain about that person after you left and tell someone that wasn't in the meeting about how wrong the other person is? That's a good indicator. Another indicator is that you end up feeling like you're having the same conversation over and over again. So if you find yourself repeat it, like thinking, we were just here last week, like, didn't we solve this? And if the answer is no, and you're back having a conversation again, there's something greater that's happening in that conversation that's worth slowing down to. So awareness. Can you notice when it's happening? And can you notice what is it about that conversation that's raising the stakes? And I think the best place to start there is to journal. So even if you walk out of that session, find yourself a blank sheet of paper and take 3 or 4 minutes to just free write. What is the most annoying thing about that conversation or about that person? What were they doing? And more importantly, what is it about them that is raising the stakes for you? So I think that's step number one. And then step number two is, can you start to notice that happening more in the moment? So I think as soon as we become aware of what is raising the stakes for us. I've had leaders tell me that that's probably one of the most freeing concepts that they've learned, is to start to notice when the stakes are rising in the moment. Because that's then when we can catch sight of something, awareness. And now I can think to myself a little bit more intentionally, okay, the stakes are rising. Um, the stakes also might be rising for the other person because they're being pretty demanding about this request. So, can I find a way to ask a question rather than to continue to push back or remain silent or not say, like, what is it that I'm holding back that actually might be helpful in the conversation? I think there's often times where we are thinking something but not saying it. Now, if we think it and say it from a place of high stakes, that tends to make things, it just continues to sort of propel the high stakes conversation. But I think the biggest change can be if we could lower the stakes for ourselves for just a moment. So the other thing you can say, just as a strategy, you can say what's going on for you. You can say, and notice the stakes are rising. Can we talk about this for a moment? Another way might be, if you really do need some space, is to just say, this seems like a really important conversation. I'd like an hour to think about it, or I'd like to think about it overnight and circle back around, so that we've got a defined moment in time that we're going to come back. Can we touch base tomorrow morning and pick this up where we're leaving off? Like, if you really feel like you just can't find your words and need a bit more space to think, I think asking someone to pause and be able to circle back around to it later in the day or the next day.
Mm,
The
that's so
goal
good.
is to lower the stakes. I think that's step number one. And awareness helps, journaling helps, starting to notice like what's happening for you. And then there's obviously more work to do, but that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, working from a place of anger and frustration seldom are
Yeah.
seldom are positive outcomes. They often just end up ticking off the other person, and my energy amps your energy up, and we
Yes.
just keep
We
going.
feed one another. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We do. So with that, we were talking a little bit there about new leaders, and you wrote a new series here about the leader's edge, a
Yeah.
7-part series about how to thrive as a newly promoted leader. It's a fable series, which makes it super easy to read. So can you give us a little taste of where to get started as a new leader and how we can thrive for a newly promoted leader?
Yeah. I think, well, we called it the Leader's Edge series because I think everything that you and I are talking about today is often it's edgy. It's edgy, meaning that if you think about yourself sort of up with your toes up on the very end of a cliff, and there's new behavior that's required of you as a leader, and it's sort of finding your grounding and your feet to move forward and to try that behavior on, even when it's going to be, it can feel risky. Even the things that you and I have talked about today, telling someone, hey, like the stakes are rising for me. You never know what you're going to get back from the other person. That in and of itself can feel like it's vulnerable. So I'm all about leaders taking a path to greater self-awareness, because I think when we're more in command of ourselves, then we're able to change the nature of the outcome of those conversations. So we're more aware of ourselves, we're more aware of our leadership. So in the blog, it just tells the story of a group of leaders who have sort of both chosen, but then find themselves in the middle of growing their leadership and starting to notice their behavior and how it shows up in a team. So they think that they're being inclusive and asking for input, but really they're shutting people down. And so catching sight of exactly what's different between what I thought I was doing and the impact that I'm really having. So it just sort of chronicles a group of leaders going through that process.
Awesome. Awesome. And if folks are looking to pick that up, you can go to teamcatapult.com/leaders edge. Get that series. It's fantastic. 7 parts, really helpful, really easy to read. So with that, lots of great stuff in the book. Congratulations. By
Thank
the way,
you.
building your model for leading change is super important. But if there was one last thing that you want to leave people with, where they can get started
Mm,
along the journey, Marsha, what would that be?
mm. I want people to lean into the idea that there's a lot that they can have impact on and change by leaning into dialogue. And I think it's a really underused process and tool for us as leaders today, that we can change a lot just by the way we show up in conversations.
That's beautiful. Lean in to dialogue. Start there. Have some empathy. Understand the nuance, and then
Mm,
use Marsha's question.
yeah,
Can I? I feel the stakes are rising,
yeah,
right? How can I? How can we kind of back this up? How can we
yeah.
do this? So, Marsha, great stuff at Team
So,
Catapult. You're doing so much good stuff. Congratulations on the book. And again, friends, go to teamcatapult.com/leaders edge. Get some more greatness from my friend, Marsha Acker. Thanks, Marsha. Great stuff
so
today.